Have you heard of how Snezhnaya was once the realm of the Fae? This race is no longer of any importance, but they still exist, as evidenced by the fact that I am standing before you.
How very interesting. I always thought the Frostmoon Scions would have more connection to the Snowland Fae. To think a Lightkeeper of all people would be our introduction to them. Well, let's look further into this. Oh, so he used to live in Snezhnaya. He had quite a reputation too, it seems. But after the Belyazar's passing, and the Tsaritsa came into power, he left the nation. He journeyed to Nod Cry, went into a deep slumber. Centuries later, he was awoken in a battle between the Wild Hunt and the Lightkeepers. We can connect the dots at this point. What about the Fae themselves? The Fae were created from the bodies of giant beasts, as well as the Frostmoon's light. Kuvaki, to be more precise. It also does seem like many of the Fae still live in Snezhnaya. I wonder how many of them are loyal to their Tsaritsa. I wonder how many of them are ranked within the Fatui. This would make for an interesting character. How about this for a story? The time of the Fae grew weaker and weaker, losing importance as time went on. Some would remain loyal to the Belyazar and would leave. Many remained indifferent and kept living their lives, neither loyal nor disloyal to the new regime. But one in particular stayed as an active member in this new order. As long as she stayed loyal and remained in a position of power, she believed she could preserve the culture of her race. It was a long shot for sure, but she was still full of optimism. Still full of hope. Hope. It suits her. Very well. Let this be your name. Nadezhda. May your hopes and dreams shine brightly in this nation of Everwinter. As of this video being made, Genshin has released 3 Lunar Reactions to the combat system: Lunar Charged, Lunar Bloom, and Lunar-Crystallize. With Hydro being the main focus on these reactions, there are 2 more that players are hoping to see: Lunar-Swirl and Lunar-Freeze. It's up in the air whether these 2 will actually appear in the future, but before that day comes, I want to share my own concept of what the latter would look like. Today's episode of Character Creator is going to be a little different. The Lunar-Freeze reaction is going to be the main focus here, so we're going to talk about my idea for it. We'll also explore which characters and teams get affected by this. Then we'll look at our featured Lunar-Freeze character and her kit design. Her name is Nadezhda, a name that means hope in Russian and Slavic origin, and a name I hope I'm at least pronouncing close enough. As always, you can find additional info down below, and captions are available if you need them. Without further ado, let's explore my idea of Lunar-Freeze. Let's start off with the reaction itself and my take on what it does. When Nadezhda or Columbina is in the party, the freeze reaction will be replaced with Lunar-Freeze. I'd say it's in between Lunar Charged and Lunar-Crystallize. It's now able to deal reaction damage that previously never existed, like with Crystallize, but in terms of the utility it provides, it's not a major overhaul. It's more like a buff that improves on a few quality aspects and makes the reaction feel a bit more consistent, like with Electro and Lunar Charged. Blessed by the power of the moons, the Freeze Aura gains a special property in which it can now stay on a boss. This isn't able to actually freeze a boss, but it will allow for certain characters to trigger effects that require the Frozen Aura to be present. So units using Blizzard Strayer can maintain the full 40% crit rate bonus. It can also be useful to trigger Shatter, which is mainly better for someone like Fremine to trigger his A4 passive on a boss. But that's not all we're doing for Shatter. Since we're gonna make the reaction damage Lunar Freeze damage, I added an extra bonus to give Shatter some love. While Lunar Freeze is enabled, all Shatter reactions will be capable of critting, This will scale only on the crit stats of the unit who triggered Shatter. It's not Lunar Shatter, so it's not buffed by lunar damage effects, but I figured if I was enabling Freeze to deal damage and crit, we might as well let Shatter crit as well. These are a couple of the bonuses I put in place to give the reaction some utility. Now let's talk about how you deal Lunar Freeze damage. Personally, I really love how they did with Lunar Bloom, where only the Nodcry characters can deal that damage. So, for Lunar Freeze, only Nadezhda and Columbina can deal Lunar Freeze damage. I'm kidding. When Lunar Freeze is enabled, all enemies will start to get Frostbite stacks. When they hit 5 stacks, 5 will be consumed, and they will take an instance of Lunar Freeze damage. How do you get stacks exactly? Well, the first method is by triggering further instances of Lunar Freeze. The second method is based around the Frozen Aura. For every second an enemy is affected by a Frozen Aura, they will get another stack. So in an optimal Lunar Freeze team, you can get the most instances of damage by having both frequent triggers and high Frozen Aura uptime. The mechanic was inspired by real-life science and temperatures. Getting hit with waves of cold or being consistently exposed to the cold would lower your body temperature, and if it gets low enough, you start getting frostbite. Additionally, since frostbite is based around individual temperatures, the stacking mechanic is independent for each enemy. So you could have enemies taking Lunar Freeze damage at different rates or intervals, depending on the factors I mentioned earlier. There are a couple instances where frostbite levels can overflow, so I added a quality mechanic to help with that. While damage occurs at 5 stacks, an enemy can have up to 6 stacks at a time, and overflow stacks will remain. So if an enemy has 6 stacks, only 5 are consumed, and they'll still have 1 when the Lunar Freeze damage occurs. Just like the other reactions, Lunar Freeze will pool every contributor's EM and crit stats if they applied Hydro or Cryo within that build-up period. Damage is like an internal hit, so it's basically single target. The reason why Lunar Freeze itself isn't doing a lot is because allowing the aura to stay on bosses already opens up a few team comps that previously might not have been possible. Once again, Freeze units can now use Blizzard Strayer's full 40% crit rate, instead of just the 20%. It would also make EM somewhat useful for the reaction damage, but not enough to want to build EM. Speaking of EM, this reaction change is a good Citlali buff. Even though her A1 can't decrease cryo resistance, she still scales primarily on EM, and can contribute a ton of damage to Lunar Freeze teams. And since Lunar Freeze is a form of cryo damage, cryo crit bonuses are also able to buff the reaction. This one's mainly a premium buff, but constellations on Shenhe, Xilonen, and Escoffier do provide cryo crit damage bonuses. In terms of some of the extended reactions, Freeze auras also act as a cryo aura, so things like Melt can be used more consistently. It can also coexist with Dendro for Bloom teams, creating the Fridge archetype. And of course, we can't forget about Shatter. Now that it can crit, the reaction is a bit better for some units. But we can take it a step further. With Geo, you can create Shatter using Geo damage, but with the right units and elemental application, Lunar-Crystallize and Lunar-Freeze can work. On the topic of Bloom and Fridge teams, someone like Kaveh in a Shatter Bloom comp can also work in Lunar-Freeze. This is all stuff that already exists on a regular freezable enemy, which is why I'm able to show the examples on screen against this test dummy. So just remember that Lunar-Freeze makes all these archetypes much more viable on bosses, not so much regular enemies. That's going to cover everything on the buffed reaction. Now we just have to tie it with a neat little bow, a character to go along with Lunar-Freeze. Nadezhda being a Lunar-Freeze character naturally means she'll be a cryo unit. Since Nadezhda has Fae everywhere, I would expect she doesn't have to hide who she is. So she probably wouldn't even be labeled as having a vision or a moon wheel. If she did, it's purely a decorative piece like with Flins. For her weapon, I chose to give her a bow. Nothing really related to Genshin lore, I just didn't want her to be a catalyst, so a bow would have been second best. For her Ascension stat, I'm giving her crit damage, since she'll have a lot of crit rate sources already. Finally, just like with all the other moon sign characters, she can provide a 14% base damage bonus to Lunar Freeze, which scales on her attack stat. Moving into her abilities, her skill is going to deal a single instance of cryo damage, scaling off her attack. She will also increase the active character's attack speed, and for bow users, will also decrease aim shot time. Both of these bonuses scale purely on talent level, similar to Mika's attack speed bonus. The skill has a 12-second cooldown, a 15-second duration, and will produce 4 particles upon casting. I chose attack speed and aim shot reduction because other forms of buffing or utility were already covered in my vision for Lunar-Freeze teams. Healing, res shred, or shielding is already covered by many meta units. Since Mika and Dahlia aren't exactly the most meta characters out there, Nadezhda will join them in the attack speed department as the premium 5-star version. And of course, we had to give Ganyu some love. In freeze teams, her firing faster is going to result in more personal damage, and this applies more cryo for more frequent Lunar Freeze instances. For her burst, Nadezhda releases a Misty Sleet Storm, which follows the active character and deals AoE cryo damage every 2 seconds. This cryo damage has no ICD, which makes her application rate consistently 2 seconds. But this ability isn't just for application, it's for damage. When the Sleet Storm deals damage to an enemy already affected by the Frozen Aura, it will deal an additional instance of direct Lunar Freeze damage. This damage scales off Nadezhda's attack stat. Lunar Freeze on its own is meant to be more of a quality reaction, so I wanted Nadezhda to be more of an Inefa-style support. She provides general utility buffs, but focuses a lot of her power on personal damage. Moving into her A1 passive, I really like how they designed Llama with the moon sign stuff, so we'll do a similar thing here. Different effects will occur if the party is in Nascent or Ascendant Gleam. For Nascent Gleam, after enemies take Lunar Freeze damage that's triggered by the Frostbite, which means its regular reaction form, not the direct form, the next 5 instances of cryo, hydro, or physical damage will ignore 10% of that enemy's defense. This is a per enemy system. In a Nascent team, your party members will just be general elemental DPS units, and I thought a defense ignore mechanic would be a cool take on a debuff. Cryo and hydro damage made sense from a freeze standpoint, but I added physical so it wouldn't be left behind. You have much better uptime on this debuff in freeze-focused teams, so you should consider units with faster application or simple permafreeze uptime. In Ascendant Gleam, there may be more of a focus on reaction damage, so I gave these bonuses. The party gains 100 EM, Lunar Freeze crit damage is increased by 20%, and Shatter crit damage is increased by 50%. Lunar Freeze gets a bonus not just for the team's reaction damage, but in the event that we make a hypothetical Lunar Freeze on-fielder, we're setting up Nadezhda to be an optimal support for them. Shatter is capable of critting now, but is still a regular transformative reaction, so I gave it a higher crit damage value. And finally, instead of the same Llama route where she gives crit rate to the reaction, I just gave EM. Reason being, the overcap on freeze is very likely with the crit rate sources being very high, so buffing it a different way is probably a better choice. Second, it makes other reactions synergize well with freeze teams, whether they be on or off field. So, a melt unit like Durin can use the EM, Fridge teams can still use EM for bloom damage, and in Lunar Bloom specifically, this can make Nadezhda and Nefer/Lauma a strong synergy. Lunar Freeze and Lunar Bloom won't disrupt each other. Nefer can use the EM bonus for her personal damage, and Lauma can use it for her damage buffing. In summary, Nascent teams should be run if the team's personal cryo, hydro, or physical damage is the main source. Ascendant teams will be much better for all reaction-focused comps, not just Lunar Freeze and Shatter, but Melt, Bloom, Lunar Bloom, etc. For the A4 passive, it's a bit simpler. Whenever enemies have their Frostbite increased, there's a chance that their level increases by 2 instead of 1. The chance of this occurring scales off 2% for every 100 attack Nadezhda has, up to a max of 40% or 2000 attack. Having this passive just means your rate of Lunar Freeze is slightly higher, because each instance has a chance for double stacking. This means more damage, but also more uptime on the A1 defense ignore. To add on to this, let's quickly go over a Columbina update. In addition to her skill doing Lunar Freeze damage in the relevant teams, her A4 also grants a 33% chance to increase the Frostbite level by 1. This effect will stack with Nadezhda's A4, not act as a separate instance. Running them together means Frostbite has a 73% chance to increase by 2 instead of 1, but because it's not separate, you will not see a scenario where it increases by 3. This mechanic of double stacks is why I added the overflow for Lunar-Freeze. You can likely go from 4 to 6 stacks, but the overflow means the extra stack will never be wasted. Let's wrap up with a very quick rundown on her best general builds and her signature weapon. For artifact stats, her best option will be attack, attack, crit damage. ER is an option on the sands if you need the energy, and while crit rate is an okay circlet choice, I prioritize crit damage because of her best sets. 2000 attack is the minimum breakpoint for her A4 passive and the Lunar-Freeze base damage bonus. Any more will just equal higher damage. Triple cryo teams are among the most common for freeze, so Nadezhda's energy needs here aren't as high. If you start going into solo cryo for the freeze variant teams, then energy will be a lot more important to manage. Now for sets, Nadezhda can use Aubade for the extra lunar damage, but this is only good in Ascendant teams. She can serve more as a support by using Serenade's EM bonus, but this is also somewhat Ascendant Gleam reliant. Since she's capable of being a unit for nascent teams as well, Blizzard Strayer will be her best all-around set. The 40% crit rate will be a very powerful boost to her damage. It's also consistent across the board since Lunar-Freeze always enables freeze auras no matter what. And Lunar-Freeze is a crit scaling damage source, so it will be useful for her regular reaction damage and direct lunar damage. On to a quick weapon overview. Since Lunar-Freeze doesn't work with damage percent sources, she wants to prioritize bows with crit and attack. EM is also a stat option, but her scaling is much more attack focused. A couple free-to-play options could be Chainbreaker in solo cryo teams. Rainbow's Serpent's Rainbow can also work, though the ER might not be necessary depending on your team comps. A 5-star example would be First Grade Magic. In teams with 2 or 3 cryo characters, Nadezhda can get an attack bonus, on top of the crit damage substat. In a similar vein, Polar Star provides attack as well. The substat is crit rate, which might risk overcapping if you run Blizzard Strayer. It also requires a normal and charge attack to get weaved in, which might be uncomfortable for some players, but overall, it's still one of her better choices. Every other weapon provides more damage bonuses, which she simply can't use for Lunar-Freeze. Objectively, Elegy might be a better choice in some of these weapons, because the bonus at least provides EM and attack to herself and her team. But what about her signature? I kept it very simple, and its weapon is very similar to Inefa's. It's gonna have a 674 base attack, a 44.1% crit damage bonus, and for its passive at R1, you get an unconditional 16% attack bonus. When the user triggers Freeze or Lunar-Freeze, or deals damage to an enemy affected by Frozen, they gain a stack of Lost Light for 12 seconds with a max of 5 stacks. Each stack increases the party's Cryo, Hydro, physical damage by 4%, Lunar-Freeze damage by 8%, and Shatter damage by 24%. A stack can be obtained once every 0.1 seconds. This weapon provides a lot, and it's designed in such a way that allows Nadezhda to properly buff all her teammates in her main team archetypes. I focus primarily on Freeze and Shatter teams, so the subcategories like Melt or Fridge don't get buffed. Considering there are other party members that provide bonuses for Cryo, Hydro, and physical damage already, I made that bonus a bit weaker, and I put more attention on the reaction bonuses. In total, this weapon can provide 20% Cryo, Hydro, or physical damage, 40% Lunar-Freeze damage, and 120% Shatter damage. Nadezhda is one of the units who gains stacks a lot faster as well. Her burst deals damage every 2 seconds, but against frozen enemies, she deals 2 instances, one that's considered Cryo Burst damage and another that's considered Lunar Freeze damage. Both of these are still considered as dealing damage to a frozen enemy, so she ends up generating 2 stacks every 2 seconds instead of 1. With that being said, this weapon might not do too much for regular Lunar Freeze teams. The reaction damage there is low, so 40% doesn't amount to that much in terms of bonuses. It's designed more around buffing Nadezhda's damage, the direct Lunar Freeze damage of Columbina, and the damage of a hypothetical Lunar Freeze DPS. Alright, that's gonna do it for this video. I always felt like a buffed version of Freeze would be a slippery slope to think of. No pun intended. The way that normal Freeze can completely trivialize crowd control in horde-based combat was an early issue Genshin had, but on the flip end, Freeze auras not being able to exist on a boss heavily limited the power of those teams. Freezing a boss completely would result in the same issues as before, which is why the new version only preserves the aura but not its freezing effect. This is just one of the directions they could go in when it comes to freeze buffs, and also one of the more basic and realistic ideas. But for now, if you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like and subscribe to support the channel. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on the Lunar-Freeze reaction idea, and on Nadezhda's Lunar-Freeze kit. If you want to share your own ideas with our community, consider joining my Discord server. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye!